Well, g'day, folks. Welcome to the Awaken Network podcast. I'm John Tyson, lead pastor of Church of the City in New York, and I'm joined by Chad Bohai, who is the lead pastor of Radiant Central Coast, and Sam Gibson, who leads Pray NYC in New York City. Thanks for joining us. In this podcast, we're going to be talking about prayer, revival, awakening, and what it looks like to seek God for another move of the Holy Spirit in our time. It's great to have you with us.
Welcome back to the Awaken Network podcast. Again, I'm Chad. This is Sam and John.
G'day, folks.
And we've been just so enjoying walking with you on this journey of what is revival, why should we care, why should we contend for awakening, some biblical principles, biblical examples and stories. It's been a powerful, amazing journey so far. Today, we're going to just camp on a passage that I know John and Sam,
yes,
this has been and for those who've contended and seen revival and awakening throughout the ages, this has been a significant passage that's had a lot of quote unquote leverage for the intercessor and for the one contending for a move of God in their generation, their time. Hosea 10, verse 12. Sow righteousness for yourselves, reap the fruit of unfailing love, and break up your unplowed ground. For it is time to seek the Lord until he comes and showers his righteousness on you.
This is one of the most hopeful passages. We all know the context of the book of Hosea. God's people are riddled with idolatry. It's probably the most awkward sermon illustration of all times. Go marry a prostitute. Tell my people.
Deliver that word today.
Yeah, this is what they're like. So, that's a challenging word, but it's God saying, I want my people back.
Yes.
It's God's heart. Chapter 8, God has sounded an alarm. Their enemies are coming against them. They're in terrible danger. And there's almost nothing they can do. But what I love about this passage is because it tells us, God's heart in times of decline is always to rescue and revive his people.
Yes.
So his heart is always for us, regardless of what it looks like around us. His heart is always for us. And then he tells us, people are always trying to answer the question, what is the sovereign versus the human component in revival? God is always sovereign in revival. He's always the one that stirs his people's hearts. He's the one that shows up with power. But there are human elements in response to the sovereign. And I think this is one of the clearest passages in the scriptures about that. And so God is saying to his people, gives them an invitation, sow righteousness for yourselves, reap the fruit of unfailing love, break up your unplowed ground. Now, when you talk about unplowed ground, it's an interesting phrase. Another translation calls it fallow ground. So it's a rare word. You wouldn't say to somebody, how's it going? You'd say, I'm in a bit of a fallow season right now.
Yes.
Let me give you an illustration that I think sort of gets to the heart of this. Imagine you've got a farmer who has a 100-acre farm, and all 100 acres are good soil and have the possibility to yield a harvest if he farms it. But over the course of time, he loses his laborers and loses his capacity, and he shrinks down every year the amount of ground that he is plowing up and sowing seed into. So he eventually, year by year, he gets smaller and smaller until he's only tilling up and sowing seed in 10 acres of ground. So what he has is 90 acres that he has neglected and let go that has the possibility of harvest, but is no longer getting a harvest because he's not tending to it. So it's the areas in our lives of spiritual possibility that we've neglected and have atrophied. And so what God says to the children of Israel is break up your fallow ground. So in all of our lives, there's areas that have the capacity for spiritual fruit, spiritual harvest, that we've let go fallow. We're in New York City. Our church is just a couple of blocks from David Wilkerson's Times Square church.
Yes.
And David Wilkerson was a bit of a wild man, wild character. He's most famous for Nicky Cruz, the Cross and the Switchblade, coming to New York. There was a teenager brutally murdered in Highbridge Park in Washington Heights. It put their photos on the cover of Life magazine. And every night, he was a pastor in Pennsylvania. Every night, he's just working his brains out, young pastor. he would take from midnight to 2 a.m. and watch TV to take the edge. Basically, you're exhausted. It's a long week.
Unwind.
Let's watch a Netflix series and get a pizza. And so this is what he's doing every night from 12 to 2. And he feels the Lord say to him, give me that time and I will use you significantly. In obedience the next day, he sells his television, which I think maybe he gives it away. And for the rest of his life, he hated television, and he called it the terrorist in your living room. And he just believed it robbed the people of God. So he started spending 2 hours seeking the Lord every night. And so that's a perfect example of fallow ground.
So good.
He wasn't watching sinful television.
Yes.
But this was just something where God says, there's a harvest there.
Wow.
Break up your legitimate relaxation and numbing.
Give me that space.
And I will do something with it. So he begins to sow into what his TV time, a culture of prayer, and this results in him having an encounter. He sees the cover of Life magazine. He feels God say to him, do something about those boys. And so he ends up driving in New York City, going to the court case, holding up a Bible, asking the judge to be able to see these boys. The media mock him, but he makes it onto the front page of all the New York City newspapers. That opens the doors, gives him credibility with the gangs. Basically, his whole ministry is launched in a moment of trading 2 hours of time. Now, when I often talk to young leaders, I don't try and do this with any legalism.
Yes.
But sometimes people will say to me, John, how do you read so much? Or how do you get a lot of stuff done? And I'm so hesitant to say that. I'm just reflecting back what people say.
Yes.
And I often just say, hey, no judgment here. But if you were to do an audit of how much time you spend watching Netflix or Hulu or sports or whatever, on average, what would it be a week? And the answer is something typically like between 7 and 12 hours. Rarely will someone say, I'm watching a show right now when I just watched one episode of it. Netflix, Crackflix, they have teed up, they've chopped off the ending, and they automatically start the next episode and they skip the roll in. It's just like they want you. And I just say, well, the thing is, I just try not to do that. And so between 8 to 12 hours is a full day of work a week. And I'm just committed to seek the Lord with those hours, to use that time to seek the Lord. I got really, really convicted. Man, I'm a little bit of a, sound like David Wilkes, the terrorist on your screen or whatever. I sound like that a little bit because I once got addicted to a TV show, and at the end of, I think, it was 12 one-hour episodes, and there was 8 seasons, which is approximately 100 hours of television. It didn't feel like it. Sure. It felt amazing, actually. I was
enjoyable.
Like I was deeply woven into the compelling multi-episode narrative of a fictional biker gang in Northern California. I mean, it was wild. And I realized this is 100 hours. And then I came across this piece of research that said, if you take 18 minutes a day, every day over the course of the year, approximately 100 hours, you will be in the top 5% of people on planet Earth on whatever you give 20 minutes a day to. Now, you think about that. That's really true. Who do you know that gives 100 hours to grow in something? We don't really do that in any area of our life. So that's just an thing. So I just said, okay, Lord, I don't want to do that. I want to take that fallow ground of media time. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm not a legalist at all. Sure. If my kids say, will you watch this show? I'll watch this show. I'm not a Pharisee. But in my heart, I'm like, Lord, I want to take the areas of spiritual potential that are rotting in the amusements of American culture. I want to take those back and just see what you do. That's what it means to break up. And then it says that you've got to sow. So once the soil is turned over, you've got to sow into the soil. And that's the seed that you put in the ground. The gospel is as potent today as it was in every revival in history. We've got the same Bible, same promises, same God. But they're taking into their lives, they're sowing the seeds of revival into their lives. They're sowing the promises of God. That passage in 2 Peter that says he's given us these great and precious promises that through them we may escape the corruption in the world through lust and be partakers of the divine nature. So what does it say? Therefore then make every effort to add to your faith. And so the promises call us to sow a different seed in hope and anticipation. And so you begin to just sow hope where there's despair. You begin to sow love where there's hate. You begin to sow passion where there's apathy. And it's in seed form.
Yes.
But the seed is potent. The kingdom always comes in seed form. Jesus' parables were always seed parables and stewardship parables about seed. And so that's what you're beginning to sow. You're sowing this into the soil of your life that you've cultivated. When pastors of churches or leaders of small groups take seasons where they step away from normal things and they sow into it, that's often where amazing things happen. Yep. The question is, why don't we make that a lifestyle instead of just a one-off season? So you begin to sow into it. I tell people all the time, if you never sow and reap in real time. There's always a process. If you don't like your current harvest, change your seed for your future.
Yes.
If you're reaping apathy, sow passion. If you're reaping exhaustion, sow rest. If you're reaping, whatever it is, change the seed for a different harvest.
Yes.
So, and then it says it's time to seek the Lord until he comes.
Until.
That is a calling for rain.
Yes.
Plowed up grain with seed in it will dry up and become nothing unless the rain comes and there's enough rain to germinate it. And so we sow, we break up, but if the rain doesn't come, and so what's our responsibility? Calling on the name of the Lord. God, please send your rain. Send your rain. And you seek him until.
Yes.
Galatians 6 says, do not become weary,
don't get weary
in doing good, because at the proper time, the appointed time, you reap a harvest if you don't give up. And so a lot of times, so a practical example, our church, we've been going hard after prayer for 6 years. In the middle of New York, through the middle of COVID, no matter what. And we're now beginning to see these glorious manifestations of windows of the presence of God.
Yes.
And people say, well, how do you not lose hope? And I'm like, right when I want to lose hope, God will drop a glory bomb on me that says more is coming. And so he gives you enough to keep going in those seasons of discouragement. So we seek him until he comes and pours out his blessing and righteousness upon us. So I think the beauty of a passage like that, it's a promise in a time of decline. It shows us the human elements that God tells us to do, but it shows us that even when we prepare everything, if he doesn't come and reign, nothing happens. And to me, this is one of the definitive passages, one of the most hope-filled passages, and you will often find through revival history, I didn't come across this passage through studying revival history. I came across this passage led by the Holy Spirit in seeking God.
Yes.
And then you think you've discovered it, and then you start reading revival history and you realize, I think everybody was here before me. So I want to just put this passage on the hearts of people again.
Yes. Say that. Yes.
Where's your fallow ground? Do a life audit. Start making strategic exchanges. Henry David Thoreau, who wrote Walden, people forget about the experiment he did. So much of what he did was actually around economics. And so he's sitting in his little hut, watching people go and trade and all the rest of it. And he has this little statement. He says, the cost of something or the price of something is whatever you give your life for to get it. Whatever time you give to a thing is what it costs you. And so what is often costing us revival is the time we give to lesser things.
That's exactly right.
So the price you pay to watch 100 hours of Netflix is 100 hours of seeking God for revival. It's 100 hours of serving the poor. It's 100 hours of anything other than just being medicated into the world. And I think Satan's great strategy, it's not to make you into a great sinner. It's not to get you to have an affair. It's to slowly edge you out into the dark. C.S. Lewis in his book, Screwtape Letters, tells this amazing story about this. It's a fictional, it's a parable. There's a young demon who's assigned to tempt someone, and he's being mentored by an older demon, his uncle Screwtape. And so the younger demon says, I want to get my guy, man. I want him to get him to commit a murder or have an affair. And Screwtape basically says, I appreciate your zeal to cause your man to destroy his life. But methods like that, God often has countermeasures for. He says, murder is not necessary if cards will do the trick. The only thing that matters is if you edge the man out of the light slowly towards the darkness. And that's Satan's great strategy. It's to slowly edge us out of devotion into civilian affairs, into trivial things, into lives like every other American. I always remember what Andy Crouch said. He said, it's not hard to be radical. He said, don't watch media and give 10% of your money to the poor and you'll be different than everybody else on your street. It's really just so true. The bar is so low that seeking the Lord in a time of decline has never been more opportune or more accessible for the world we live in.
Wow.
Yeah, I think Hosea 10:12, there's such an invitation that like what is now seen as radical is just normative Christianity throughout history. Like what we call zeal is just like what would be described as the normal Christian life. And I think it's just this idea that often when people that are contending for revival feel like there's this like sense of aloneness or like, man, no one's really getting after it. For me, this passage is confronted, it says, sow for yourselves righteousness, reap steadfast love. Some say like reap mercy.
Yeah.
And I found early in my zeal to really start pressing in for this, what I was sowing self-righteousness.
Oh, that is so true.
I was making I'm not watching TV anymore. I'm seeking God. And what I was reaping was comparison, judgment, and hardness of heart. And I just, it's important to say because, this whole thing, we're not promoting legalism.
No.
We're inviting you into a heart that's like, man, is my heart moved with compassion for the city I'm in? Is my heart moved with compassion when I look upon our congregation? Like, I want a heart that is moved. Jesus saw the crowds and didn't get frustrated and say, you guys don't get it. I'm here in the flesh, you don't get it. It says he's moved with compassion.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the early things that confronted me on. And I actually had a mentor I was asking, it's like, man, I'm just burning that like prayer is not just a thing, it's the thing we need to do. It is time to seek the Lord. And when you're sitting there seeking God and no one is seeking God, it's really easy to look around and get frustrated. And he gave me this word. He says, Sam, you just simply keep living the life they long for, and eventually they'll begin to ask you questions. You keep burning with zeal, you keep seeking the Lord, and I promise you, eventually they'll start asking you questions. And it happened. I stopped trying to demand people like, I'm not demanding this of you. I'm just going to live this life. I'm just going to resolve and be committed in my own spirit. And all of a sudden there's this wake of people that are like, something's different. It feels like when you open your mouth with the word of God, there's something new on it. Like it was you actually know it's hidden, but it's shown in the public spaces. Jesus says like, hey, what you do in the darkness will be like, it's going to be shouted in the light. Like is that what is done in secret does make its way out into public. And I'm kind of personally haunted by it is time to seek the Lord. I think God is really like, there is a withholding of revival rain in the Western church. We don't have enough seed in the ground. It's like you get the rain, if there's no seed, it's like it's not going to germinate. It's like, man, I'm just trying to like do whatever I can to put as much seed into the ground that when revival raining down of righteousness, there is an abundance of seed in the ground to soak this thing up.
One of my questions for you: how have you cultivated? We talked about the Moravians, and it's about potency, right? How have you pastorally, because you pastor people at NYC and obviously at Church of the City, obviously I pastor. But how have you provoked people beyond from the pulpit and personal example, but in like a covenant that you enter into with people? Give me something. I'm thinking specifically of like that group of 25 or 30 you're taking some of your prayer leaders through to just where is the fallowed ground? Let's just go after that this summer, this season. And see, like you said, sow new seed for a different harvest.
Yes. I mean, it's very simple, but John kind of mentioned this. It's exchanges in your life, but also giving people something to do. It's like we've gotten so settled of just like, man, if you just like read your Bible, like just like a 5-minute quiet time, and it's like, there's actually a lot more, and people don't actually have the tools to what it means like seek God, and so I think it's like, living a life in a way that it's not in any way, shape, or form. Like I'm personally, I wish I was more like John, where it's just like, I'm just like freely offering things up. Usually what God does is he puts more on me that requires me to consecrate more of my time. Like I just have this like awareness of like, the more external things grow, the more secret things need to grow. And as secret things grow, other things have to leave. Like, it's just like this pressure happens in my life. John has this thing where he just like gets after it all the time. I get after it because left to my own devices, I am binge watching Netflix and eating pizza.
I mean, me too.
Yeah. So in Titus, the Apostle Paul's instructing, he says like, teach them to live in accord with sound doctrine. And I think forever it was like, we want to teach doctrine and hope that leads to sound living. There's actually the invitation to like, hey, you need to teach something in accordance with it. And I think probably more than ever, people need to be given like very practical things to do. So like we're basically asking people like, hey, just read the book of Revelation cover to cover in one sitting, twice a week. Does that sound like a lot? It's literally 40 minutes. You can read through the Bible in 90 days, taking 40 minutes a day. Very easy. And so it seems like it's like this is extreme. It's like this is actually you not watching one episode of Netflix. It's not that big of an exchange. And the beautiful invitation is in the kingdom, the exchange rate is very different. Like what David Wilkerson reaped from 2 hours of not watching TV.
Oh my gosh, mate!
Is 2,000 years worth of a.
And here's why that's so potent. Even if you just did the word thing, like say you're listening to this, you're a youth pastor, you're a lead pastor. It doesn't matter. You're whatever your vocation. How much that new seed you're sowing in that now fallow, becoming workable ground affects community groups. Hey, what are you reading?
Yes.
It affects your work conversations. Man, I just, you have bread to share with the passerby. It affects your lenses. That 2 Corinthians 5:16.
That's exactly right.
It's changing how I view the world and view people. So that one commitment to say that space of fallow ground, I'm going to sow new seed into that. It actually, it changes the whole game. Like
the beautiful
whole
thing,
culture,
Chad. No, you're exactly
capacity
right. When you are and you're building a community around seeking God, and so you know what their question becomes about seeking God. So I'll say this all the time. Like as a leader, the questions you ask determine the culture you create. You don't like your culture, begin to ask better questions. You know what I like, and I say this in like all kindness. You go to most Western churches, depending on what context of the country you're in. You're in the lobby before services starts, and you're talking about whatever sports event happened the night before, the latest trend on TV. It's like if you actually want to get caught up on social norms or whatever everyone else. Yeah, I mean, it's literally.
What's TikTok again?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the latest and greatest thing on Netflix, and it's like, I'm not coming to church to have a conversation that I could have at a coffee shop or a conversation. Like, it's like, this is really the same conversation that's happening in the world. But when you begin to ask questions of like, hey man, did you read Revelation this week? What insight are you getting? Hey man, did you we're anchoring around these like passages that we're just kind of like so. And so also you got a group of people that can begin to have a conversation around that topic. That's actually like reaping a culture that we want. Not just like, man, let's how was the sports thing last night? That's great. It's like, man, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a lesser thing. It's fallow ground that we have. It's like, man, you want to change the culture, ask better questions, sow better questions. Because like, I'm knowing people ask, it's like, I'm always going to ask people like, hey, what's God teaching right now? What are you learning from the word?
That's a great question.
People will meet with me. They're like, I was thinking about this question, knowing I was going to talk to you. It's like, good. That's better than you thinking about things that don't matter. And I'm not in a legalistic way.
No, get it.
You've got a really important principle here. Everybody knows that it's potency that changes culture. And you get people who may hear what we're saying and like, that's so extreme. And yet they may follow a football team that during final season in New York City, these men will gather with their friends, take their shirts off, paint their chests literally the colors of their team, scream at the screen, and go from bar to bar where the game is played. Or people say, you do these revival tours, that's so crazy. I'm like, what is you visiting every baseball stadium in America? It's a baseball tour. I actually celebrate your passion.
Yes.
I love that. I prefer passion over mediocrity. All of us know, though, these things are not extreme.
Yes.
When someone gets into CrossFit and then all of a sudden they're doing paleo or keto, or they find a way to get up 3 mornings a week and work out for 2 hours. I mean, anybody who gets serious about anything begins to break up fallow ground. And here's what we're saying. Jesus is the first pursuit worth breaking fallow ground for.
That's it.
It's time.
It's so time.
That's the goal of this whole podcast series, Awaken Network. It's to get your hearts to realize it's time. Let's make good exchanges. Let's do it together.
I say this all the time with people that are like helping us build this culture of prayer is, hey, I just like what happens in our corporate prayer sets, they should like be felt on Sunday. What I mean by that is no one signed up for a lukewarm version of Christianity. No one says, man, I want to look at the person who gave up everything for me and just like live a mediocre life and just check a couple boxes. The problem is that's like the settled atmosphere of the room. And so it's just like, man, people don't want to have this lukewarm version of faith. They actually want to burn. They just need someone to show them the way. So show them the way. Like, and it doesn't have to be this like loud, extreme yelling, look at us. It is just like worship in a way that like is actually responding to God, not settling for the atmosphere of the room. You know, like turning up the temperature, just the question of like, we get so overwhelmed. Like I used to get overwhelmed by these like, you know, revivalist lifestyles looking into it. It's like, man, I don't know what it would like to ever spend 6 hours straight in prayer. Now that's actually a relatively normal practice of my life.
Wow.
You know, and it's like, at the time it used to paralyze me, but it's like, you know what? But I'm never going to spend 6 hours until I spend 10 minutes. If you're spending 10 minutes, go 20. And it's just,
Build capacity.
I'm personally in my own heart always, what does it like to turn the degree up 1 degree temperature? And I've just resolved, I know John has too, I know you have as well. I'm consistently just turning up the dial 1 more notch. I don't have to get to level 500, but I can go from level 199 to 200 and 200 to 201 and just inviting people into that path. Just take 1 more step in. And what they begin to see the fruit of the exchange. I gave up this lesser thing for a greater thing, and it's awesome. Jesus is actually like, this is real.
Yeah.
We forget, as it says in Psalm 16, in your presence is fullness of joy and pleasures, plural, pleasures at your right hand. And that's what happens when you break through into the presence of God. You start going. I had no idea it was this good. Oh my gosh, I would give everything to this. How you get addicted to the presence of God. How can I be with him more? You fall in love. You get love sick and you long for more. And as many people have pointed out, the lover will always outwork the worker.
100%.
And when people get a vision of love, when they draw near to God and he draws near to them, something happens in their heart and faithfulness becomes passion because God meets you there.
Sow for yourselves righteousness, reap steadfast love, break up your fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord until he comes and he rains his righteousness upon you. Man, it's been an amazing episode. Live in that passage. Maybe read the book of Hosea and just walk through those steps that John and Sam just walked us through. Thanks for joining us for this episode. We will see you on the next one.